Welcome to Perspectives in Business. I am Juan Carlos Giraldo from Boston, United States. An interesting topic that was discussed during the presidential campaign here in the United States was the reaction of the Trump administration on sustainability and ESG metrics. In this episode, my guest, Larson, a sustainable investment advisor, shares his thoughts on sustainable investments and ESG metrics in this second administration of President Donald Trump. Urban, how are you? It's a pleasure to have you again on my podcast, but in a different kind of scenario. How are you?
It's good to be back.
Yeah. Well, last year, actually, Urban, we discussed ESG and politics.
Yes, that's still an important topic.
Yeah, crucial. And one of the questions was obviously about Donald Trump. So I was reading an article in the Financial Times, and I sent you the link, and the title is Can Sustainable Investing Survive Trump 2.0? So the political backlash against ESG is very strong, but the sector is evolving, this article mentioned. So according to Morningstar data, this article says that even though, having problems with the ESG and Trump, the sustainable funds still is growing. In the third quarter in 2024 was 10.4 billions. What are your thoughts?
Well, 10.4 billion isn't that much money, actually, when you look at the size of the fund management industry. And as the FT article pointed out, the sustainable investing industry in the US is tiny compared to what it is in Europe and the UK. But why is money not fleeing the sector in the face of all this political backlash? I think there are a couple of reasons. First of all, I remember vividly going to a sustainable investment conference in New York right after Trump was elected the first time. And the consensus at the conference was very much he's too late, the ship has sailed. He can't turn back the clock on sustainable investing. And I think that's still true. I think you still have the biggest public sector pension funds in the US very much in favor of investing sustainably, which would be the pension funds of California, New York State, and New York City. They're not changing their investment strategy because of Trump. They're completely indifferent to what he says about sustainable investing. I think another issue is simply reality. Most people are well aware that climate change is happening, and therefore we need to prepare for it. I like to tell people may not believe in climate change, but the insurance companies do. We've seen that really clearly with insurance companies having to reevaluate their businesses in areas of the country that are particularly vulnerable to climate change, particularly Florida and California, where they have been raising premiums, not renewing coverage, no longer taking on new clients. That's reality. There is nothing anyone can do, unless you forbid the insurance industry from operating as a for-profit business, which I don't think anyone's going to do. I certainly don't think the Trump administration can do that. I think that that's going to keep happening. And I think there are obviously plenty of other issues that sustainable investors continue to look at that are happening. There are still a lot of issues with, for example, labor, both here and abroad. We've seen unions forming at Starbucks and Amazon, among other companies. I think the awareness of that kind of social issue is not going away either. And the third component is governance, and that ought to be a completely politically neutral issue, because I think everyone can agree that company management needs to listen to shareholders and do what shareholders ask, because after all, shareholders own the company. That's not going to change. I mean, we did see in the last Trump administration regulations that made it harder for shareholders to hold management to account, which frankly I think is anti-capitalist. I wouldn't be surprised if they try that again. And the article also mentioned another hit to sustainable investing in recent years, which is that from 2009 to 2021, if you were not invested in oil and gas, you did very well. It was the worst performing sector in the market for all that time, and people, you know, often quintupled their money in renewable energy investments. But of course, since the invasion of Ukraine, we've seen very strong oil prices, and that hurts sustainable investing. But that's a cyclical thing. It's not something that is a permanent change.
I see. Urban, there is a one thing that I read in the article from the Financial Times that they said that the industry agrees on this year in 2025 that the term ESG has been weaponized, and it's confusing to investors. Why you think it's confusing to investors?
I think that there's a very powerful lobby that does not want shareholders to hold companies to account on particular issues like climate change. I mean, in particular, but others as well. And I think that the American right wing has been very effective at taking terms that were not meant to be political and weaponizing them, including ESG, which I said in our last podcast, it was never meant to be political. It's really about trying, getting saving capitalism from itself by mobilizing shareholders to ensure that companies are thinking longer term, that they're paying attention to the environmental and social context in which they operate, that they are preparing to protect themselves from the consequences of climate change. These things should not be political. It's really about improving the long-term health of capitalism, which I'm all for.
I think the metrics are great, but when politics or politicians involved in this kind of situation, destroy everything.
Yes, I think that there is a strong current in the US of politicians who are very good at politicizing things that were not meant to be political. To a certain extent, I think you can lay blame at the feet of the oil industry, which for years has funded research institutes and lobbying efforts, not always openly, that aim to discredit the fact that climate change is happening and aim to sort of pull the wool over people's eyes. And that's also clearly had an effect. And I think the there's a socially conservative current that's also joined in. It's interesting though. There was an article on Bloomberg recently about fund managers that were specifically promoting themselves as anti ESG. One of which is a firm called Guidepost, which manages the pension funds for Southern Baptist ministers. And they are opposed to things, abortion and any consideration of the rights of transgender people, whom I always like to remind everyone are about 0.1% of the population. But what struck me is here you had an organization saying, we are anti ESG, but yet they were applying their faith based values to investment, just like so many other organizations that are pro ESG. So, a lot of sustainable investing began with faith based organizations. You had the Methodist Church, you know, nearly 300 years ago, forbidding its followers to invest in gambling, alcohol, the slave trade. You have the Presbyterian Church investing in line with its values, the Unitarian Universalist Association, a number of Catholic orders as well. Really, nuns have been at the forefront of sustainable investing since the 70s. Um, so it's interesting that the Southern Baptist Convention is following in the footsteps of other religious organizations by saying this is what we believe, we want to align our investments with our values, which is a well-established point of view, and yet they're depicting it as anti-ESG, which I actually tried to speak to the a spokesman from Guidepost about this because I thought it was quite interesting that they were both investing in doing what's called mission aligned investing, and at the same time attacking ESG, which is contradictory. They obviously don't see it that way, but I think it's a deliberate or or perhaps uncomprehending misinterpretation of what ESG is.
You mentioned something very interesting, how companies or employees are working. For example, Starbucks try to make a union. You just mentioned the people of the transgender movement, etc. Do you think that this backlash is more intense because the S metric was prioritized in the corporate world, and some people are very conservative or extremely conservative to want to put the money in this kind of investment?
I think that's quite possible. I think that that may very well be part of it. I think also there are obviously large interests opposed to unions. I think that clearly what we've seen in the last week is a major rejection of the idea that American government and corporate world need to make efforts to include everyone. We've seen, for example, the rescission of Lyndon Johnson's executive order from 1965 banning racial discrimination in federal government contracts. There's all this talk of meritocracy, that somehow diversity, equity, and inclusion is opposed to meritocracy. But I have two answers to that. First of all, the people who are preaching meritocracy are fairly mediocre themselves. And second of all, from a purely economic point of view, which is what I tell my students to do,
Mhm.
we all know that talent, ambition, and hard work are distributed across all of humanity. They're not the monopoly of any particular ethnicity, they're not the monopoly of either gender. And if you are excluding people from your workforce because they're not white men, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. You could be hiring some really good people and you're not doing it.
It's a very thin line, but you are totally right because it's excluding. There is a lot of potential in another side, that can be helpful for the organization, in any ways.
Yes, and just to give an analogy outside the world of business, I'm on the board of an organization called Capella Clausura in Boston, which performs music written by female composers from the Middle Ages to the present day. And there's some music written by women, for example, 17th century Italian nuns that we performed last spring. And it's really sophisticated and very beautiful. And to think for, 400 years, we have not been able to hear this music because it was written by a woman is, I feel cheated
Why?
because here I am, well into middle age, and I didn't know about this music until now, and I love classical music. To think that there's all this great music out there that we don't know about because of who wrote it, not because of the quality.
Urban. Let's highlight some part of your article that you wrote in your webpage. Very, very interesting. Is titled "What Does Trump's Return to the Presidency Mean for Sustainable Investors?" I found it very interesting that you start your article with the following statement. The first week after Trump was elected as the next president of the United States, the S&P 500 gained 3.5%. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Sure. I mean, the stock market went up based on a couple of things. I think there was
Mhm.
relief that the election went smoothly, that there was, we knew
Yes.
late that night who had won. And so there was no uncertainty like we had in 2000. There was no chance for the kind of chaos that Trump fomented in 2020. I think because money is still relatively cheap and there's a lot of money around that sort of propels the stock market to be more optimistic. They're always looking for reasons to invest. And many on Wall Street supported Trump because they liked the tax cuts he promised them and they liked the promise of deregulation. And so the market got quite excited about that. Within that, it was striking that, for example, renewable energy stocks did very badly for obvious reasons, because Trump is, of course, opposed to renewable energy. A sector that did Two sectors did especially well, though. One was for profit prisons, and the other it was anything related to crypto. And so it was quite clear what sectors people thought would benefit most or be hurt the most. Since then, the market was actually down in December, as I think reality sunk in, and it's been very volatile in January so far, though it's up slightly. But as I said in my article, I think that at the time of the first week or two after the election, I think investors were forgetting a key factor that we've now seen,
Yeah.
come out and create volatility, which is the uncertainty, which is that I didn't necessarily agree with all of Biden's and
Okay.
Kamala Harris's economic policies. But the one thing you could count on with them, they were not going to do anything crazy.
Mhm. In this case, it's a little bit
And
like a
yes, I mean, I think that clearly you cannot count on Trump not doing anything crazy.
right.
We have already seen him impose all kinds of sanctions on Colombia and then would remove them 9 hours later. We've seen him threaten to put massive tariffs on Denmark to get them to give us Greenland.
Hmm.
We have seen him send out a memo ordering the entire federal government to stop dispersing money and then rescind it within 48 hours. There's a degree of unpredictability that was not there before. And markets don't like that kind of thing.
Today, I saw on X that the administration just canceled $50 million, something like that, for ESG consulting in Africa, something like that.
Well, actually, they stopped all foreign aid. So this is just part of it. The only thing we're still funding is military aid to Israel and Egypt. And then they gave a temporary waiver to continue funding the AIDS program that President Bush Jr. started, which was very important in, for example, eliminating mother to child transmission of AIDS and other things. So those all other foreign aid has been stopped.
In your article, you mentioned Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, you mentioned also TikTok. It's a very weird relationship, Trump and Elon Musk, because, for example, Musk, the owner of Tesla, if you go to the website mentioned that the mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Something like it's kind of paradoxical because Trump said that he's against, but still is working with Elon Musk. And you mentioned a very important concept is chronic capitalism. What do you think about that? What is the relationship? One is a Tesla, of course, is using renewable energy, but at the same time, you had on the other side Donald Trump that doesn't like that. What do you think?
It is very contradictory. And I can't claim to know what either one of them is thinking. I would say looking at Tesla from the investment point of view, as a car company, it is not doing very well. Sales are falling. They have ongoing production problems. I think they've recalled the new Cybertruck maybe 4 times in the year since it was introduced. There are lots, I just got a copy of Consumer Reports today that rated the Tesla 3 and the Tesla S as among the least reliable cars on the US market. It's not a very, it's, their cars are beautiful, in my opinion, but it's clearly, as a car company, it's faltering. It's almost as if Elon Musk is losing interest in that side of the business. And I think it seems that he no longer cares that much about clean energy. He has other issues that matter to him more, and so he sees closeness to Trump as a way of furthering those issues. He's moved politically quite far to the right compared with where he used to be. So it does seem contradictory at first, but I think that Elon Musk no longer cares that much about clean energy if he ever really did.
Because he's more focused in space, maybe?
Space seems to be his bigger obsession. Yes, getting to Mars.
Yeah.
With Tesla, I think he came across a small company that had good technology. He took it over. He made himself the public face of it. But it was, and he's obviously a smart man. But there were always other people who did the actual inventing.
Urban, is there anything that you would like to add to this conversation? What are your thoughts? or predictions.
Well, I just wanted to elaborate a bit more on the issue of crony capitalism because I think that
Yes, this is a very interesting term.
this is what you see in a country where wealth is very concentrated, where the leaders of business are very close to the government, and when they are able to get special treatment. And I think that is certainly what Elon Musk is aiming for, and other corporate leaders maybe as well. We already saw in Trump's first term when he would announce tariffs, companies would immediately hire lobbyists to pressure the government. They would give donations to Trump's political campaign
Hmm.
in order
Exactly.
to get what they needed to import exempted. Of course, there are other companies that would do the same kind of lobbying in order to get tariffs put on their competitors. And so when you have a government that is run in an increasingly arbitrary way by one man by one man and the people around him, companies have every incentive to try to join the inner circle in order to get some benefits for themselves. It's, I think, very dangerous for society as a whole.
This is why we see the all the CEOs like Apple, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and Musk himself in the inauguration. Maybe
Yes, I think they see that if they oppose Trump, he will find ways to get back at them. Jeff Bezos, for example, lost a big contract from the Defense Department in Trump's first term because Trump was mad at the Washington Post. They also see that they have a chance to get in on his good side and benefit from that later if they need favors. And for example, here's the thing on Musk's agenda is Trump says he wants to end all the incentives for buying electric cars. Well, Musk thinks that Musk likes that because Tesla is so big that their cars no longer qualify for the incentives. Of course, they're the market leader by far. So his thinking is if the incentives for electric cars go away, we're going to be fine, but our competitors will suffer. And this kind of thing is really it's corrosive. It rots the democratic system, the business environment, capitalism. I think that it's the kind of thing that led in Venezuela to Hugo Chavez arriving in power because pre-Chavez you had a system that was very much run for the benefit of a small group of people. Yes, it was capitalist, but it was crony capitalism. I think it's a very short-sighted way to run a country and an economy because what you end up doing is discrediting the entire capitalist system. And that is yeah, that's something I really worry about.
Urban, where people can contact you.
Sure. My webpage is www.whitepineadvisory.com. You can see my articles there, and it's very easy. If anyone wants to actually talk to me, you can send me an email or request a Zoom call via the website. I'm easy to find.
Urban, this kind of topic about politics and economy and ESG and sustainability, etc., is very intense and endless. I would like to say thank you for your time, Urban.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I am Juan Carlos Giraldo from Boston, United States. Thank you so much, everyone.